Hey everybody, welcome back to Fantasy Football's Finest. This will be the second video in our NFL mock draft series, and today I'll be analyzing picks 6 through 10. I'll be giving a rundown of each team's needs, their free agency signings thus far, some possibilities for teams given their current situation, and ultimately what I believe that team will do in their slot. I have picks 1 through 5 on the screen right now. I'm going to also have the picks scrolling on the bottom of the screen so you can all keep up as far as that goes. The link for the first video, in case anyone else is interested, will be posted in the description below. And so now picking up where I left off, the Los Angeles Chargers are now on the clock. So the Chargers, of course, are in the AFC West where they have to play Patrick Mahomes twice a year. And that's pretty tough. So a lot of what they did in free agency was building their defense. They added guys like Chris Harris, at corner, which I think is huge for them. He's a great man coverage corner who can create a lot of turnovers. And they added Linval Joseph at defensive tackle, which is huge for them. He is a excellent run defender and will help them out greatly, especially now that they've been in the 4-3 scheme now for a couple years. They've been really missing a solid defensive tackle. Other things that the Chargers have done, they kind of reworked their offensive line a little bit. They signed Brian Bulaga from Green Bay Packers. They're probably going to play him on the left side. I don't think he'll stay on the right because it's a little pointless unless they plan on drafting a left-handed quarterback, which they'll probably keep Bulaga on the right side then. They also traded for Trey Turner, who's a guard, very good in both run and pass. They franchise tagged Hunter Henry, so that should be pretty good for them. And also they re-signed Austin Ekeler. Now, Austin Ekeler, he's a great change of pace back. I don't think he can handle the workload of, every down back. He's quick, he's shifty, he catches the ball really well out of the backfield. But in goal line situations, I don't believe he's great at, running between the tackles. So the Chargers, I like where they're picking right now. And I think they build on the future. And ultimately, I think they take Tua here. I think that's great for them. They have a guy in Tyrod Taylor who they believe in. And honestly, you get Tua, whether he's hurt, fully healthy or not, he comes in, he sits for a year, and he learns behind a journeyman quarterback who's a very good professional athlete. So I like Tua here. And, like I said earlier, playing Patrick Mahomes twice a year, you have to have a guy that can keep up with him. You have to have a guy who can make plays not only with his arm, but with his feet as well. And having a guy like Tua potentially, this is the whole thing about the draft. These guys are coming out of college, and we don't know who they're going to be. So it's all based on potential. Tua, I'm not that sold on him. I know a lot of people are saying he's a great quarterback, but let's be honest. He's coming from Alabama, okay? This guy is playing with potentially 3 first-round draft picks at wide receiver. He's got another first-round talent at tackle, Jedrick Wills, and there's some other guys along the offensive line that have done really well. They've also had running backs that come out of Alabama that are top-tier talent in the NFL. So I'm not too sold at quarterback for anyone coming out of there. So we'll see. Look, he looks good in his pro day video. I like the way that he throws the ball. He's got excellent feet. Reminds me a lot of Russell Wilson, the way that he moves around and the way that he keeps his body compact and can shift around in the pocket. I don't think he's going to take off as much as Wilson, but I think he'll be a pretty good quarterback down the stretch. Like I said, you draft him, you sit him for a year. Maybe if it turns out to be like a Patrick Mahomes situation, you start playing him towards the end of the year. Like weeks 14 through 17, just to see what you have, and so you know what to do going forward. So at 6, Chargers, Tua Tagovailoa, and that's what they do there. Moving on, Carolina Panthers are next in the 7 slot, and the Carolina Panthers play in the NFC South. In the NFC South, you have high-powered offenses. You have the Atlanta Falcons, who are there, Matt Ryan, Julio Jones. Okay, you have Drew Brees with Mike Thomas, right? And now Tampa Bay, they signed Tom Brady. This is one of the biggest offseason stories in the history of the NFL. And you pair him with Mike Evans. The Panthers on the roster currently, they let James Bradbury go to the New York Giants, and not that he was that great of a corner anyway. I think the Giants overpaid on him, but that's another topic. You need a guy who can cover these number one receivers and follow these guys around the field, because they're not going to be able to keep up with these top level talents, and especially on teams where they have more than one receiver, basically everyone in that division. So you're playing Julio, you're playing Thomas, and you're playing Evans twice a year. You need a guy who can cover, and that's why I think the Panthers take Jeff Okudah here. He's the top man-to-man corner in the NFL draft, right? And you got to play defense. If you can't stop these guys, they're going to roast you. So Panthers could end up trading down here. I don't think they will, but there's a possibility of that. So you got Rule taking over as head coach, and I'm sure he wants to bring in more players, younger players who fit his scheme a little bit better. But I think with Okudah on the board, you have to take him, and you have to play the matchup game with everyone else in your division. Next up will be the Arizona Cardinals. And the Arizona Cardinals actually did a lot in this offseason. They shored up linebacker position with Devondre Campbell, who came from the Falcons, and he is very versatile at linebacker. He plays the run well. He's very good in pass coverage, and he could also rush the passer. In college, he was a 4-3 defensive end, but in the NFL, he's been playing outside linebacker. They put a transition tag on Kenyon Drake, which is great because once he came to the team towards the end of the year, I mean, wow, they started taking off, and that offense is going to be an issue for defenses to deal with. They kept Larry Fitzgerald. The offensive line is still pretty rough, in my opinion. They have two guards on the interior that are more run blockers than pass protectors. Their tackles are decent. Marcus Gilbert, they re-signed for one more year. Of course, they traded for DeAndre Hopkins. They lost a second-round pick doing so, but pairing him with guys like Andy Isabella, Larry Fitzgerald, Hakeem Butler, and Christian Kirk, that receiving core is absolutely ridiculous. So they're probably going to focus on the quick passing game. They're going to have to, because their offensive line is just not that good. As far as defense goes, like I said, they signed Devondre Campbell, they signed Devon Kennard at linebacker, and Jordan Phillips is coming over, and he's just coming off a 9.5 sack season. So him at defensive tackle, I think, is really going to be good for them. They want to build their defense because they're trying to score points, and this is kind of going to be the model of the Indianapolis Colts when Peyton was there. You have guys like Dwight Freeney and Robert Mathis. Let Peyton get the lead, and then have these guys come off the edge. So, I mean, a guy like Clavon Chasen out of LSU, I think, is going to be a good fit. You already have Chandler Jones on one side, and so you take a chance on a guy like this on the other side. His speed, his athleticism, I just think would be great to pair with Chandler Jones. He gets a chance to learn from one of the best edge rushers in the NFL, and having both of those guys come off the edge will just be absolutely insane. What they could do here is they could trade down to acquire more picks, of course, because they lost a second rounder in getting DeAndre Hopkins. But I think getting a guy like this potentially off the edge would be great for them here. So next up, the Jacksonville Jaguars. They let a lot of guys go this past season. They traded Jalen Ramsey. They traded A.J. Bouye. They traded Calais Campbell. So their defense that was once one game away from playing in the NFL is now just in shambles. There's a lot of good defensive players, a lot of good defensive depth in this year's draft. So they could potentially go for an offensive lineman here. I don't think they do, because the talent that they lost on defense is kind of a pressing need for them. You sign guys like Tyler Eifert at tight end. Now, that guy hasn't been able to stay healthy for the last 3 or 4 years, but when he is healthy, he was one of the top tight ends in the league. They have Yannick Ngakoue, who they franchise tagged. Who knows if he's going to sign his tender or not. But if he plays there, you have rookie standout Josh Allen on the other side. you really need to shore up the interior of that defense. So I think taking a guy like Javon Kinlaw, defensive tackle, would be outstanding for them. You already have two guys on the outside that you have to account for. So having a guy like that who's athletic he's a better pass rusher, than he is a run defender, but he can learn that over time. And so having three guys that can really get after the quarterback, I think would be huge for them. So Javon Kinlaw to the Jacksonville Jaguars, I think will just be, you put him in there day one with Ngakoue and Allen, and I think they're wreaking havoc on the quarterback. And having a good pass rush helps a young, inexperienced secondary because they're getting to the quarterback faster, which is forcing him to make inaccurate or rushed throws. So there's a chance for them to create a turnover or force an incompletion or something like that. So next we have the Cleveland Browns, which is everyone's favorite on-paper team. Every offseason over the last 2-3 years, they've just been, the Browns are going to win the Super Bowl. I don't know how the Browns are the Browns. They're just a terrible organization who can never seem to make the right call. Even with hiring a head coach this offseason, they dropped the ball on a lot of big-name coaches that they could have got. Instead, they're stuck with Stefanski, a one-year offensive coordinator. Not saying he's not a good coach. I have no idea what the guy is honestly going to do. He did pretty well in Minnesota, but, you look at the guys there in Minnesota. Dalvin Cook at running back. You have a pretty solid offensive line. You got Kyle Rudolph at tight end. And of course, you have Stephon Diggs, who's no longer there, but you also had Adam Thielen. And you signed Kirk Cousins. Whatever people want to say about Kirk Cousins, I think he's a pretty good quarterback. So you had all these things. Now he's going to a place on the Cleveland Browns where you have equally the same, if not better talent, right? Odell, Jarvis, they signed Austin Hooper to a big deal. You have Nick Chubb, who's an absolute freight train, and then you got Kareem Hunt in the backfield as well, who's great runner, great pass catcher. So this offense is built. Their struggles last year came from the offensive line, which were unfortunate because Joe Thomas is no longer there. You traded Kevin Zeitler to the Giants, but we'll have to see what happens with the Browns as far as the offensive line. Now they did sign Jack Conklin in the offseason, which I think is a huge pickup for them. He'll be great on the right side, and so getting a left tackle at some point in the draft, I think will need to be addressed. But the Browns, as far as their free agency signings, they did a good amount, right? You signed Adrian Claiborne from the Falcons, who's a pretty good run defender at defensive end. B.J. Goodson at linebacker, who I don't think is a very good player, and he hasn't been over the last couple years. So they also got Carl Joseph from the Oakland Raiders, who I'm surprised let walk. He's a pretty good run defender at safety. He needs work in coverage, but he should be all right. And one of their best free agent signings, Andrew Sendejo. He's a very smart safety coming over from Minnesota, so he's going to know the system that Stefanski wants to run, and which is really good, so he can help out the young secondary. And they have a young secondary. They have two talented corners, first-round draft pick, Greedy Williams that they picked up last year, and then Gary and Conley, who they also have. So, it's a young secondary. You need a leader back there, someone who can show them the ropes, tell them, make sure they're lined up in the right place. Their defensive line is awesome. You have Myles Garrett, who is one of the top defensive ends in the league, right? They lost Joe Schobert at linebacker, and he was kind of their quarterback of the defense. So ultimately, I think what the Browns do here is you have to go middle linebacker. Picking a guy like Patrick Queen, who can play sideline to sideline. He's a very good run defender, and he's excellent in pass coverage. He's got speed coming from LSU. Sorry, that's my dog. He sees something. So he's a very good defender in both the run and pass, can cover sideline to sideline, and they need a solid middle linebacker. Otherwise, they're just going to fail. You need someone to get your defense lined up in the right situation. And ultimately, let's be honest, you're facing Lamar Jackson twice a year. So having a guy who can potentially spy him and make sure that the defense is lined up correctly is going to be extremely important from here on out. So Browns with the 10 pick taking Patrick Queen from LSU. And that's going to sum up my next 5 picks 6 through 10. I'll be back next time with picks 11 through 15. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and thanks to everyone who watched. I'll see you soon.